Welcome. I'm so glad to spend some time with you today. This is a topic that I'm really enthusiastic about, and I could talk about it all day long. How do we get a pick me up at the end of as we move to the end of the school year? But because I can just wax eloquent on this, I'm going to stick pretty close to my notes so that I can make sure you get what you came here to hear and that I stay in a reasonable amount of time. So I want to apologize right up front for reading my notes, and I'm not ignoring you. I just want to make sure that both you and I accomplish what we want to do today. So as we homeschool, having homeschooled myself, I know that as the year winds down, we all feel a little bit down. Spring is coming, we want to be outside. We're tired of worrying about math and English and vocabulary and the feelings that we have as we homeschool that we may not be doing enough. But I'd like to suggest to you today that one way that you can really pick yourself up in these last few months and really give a shot of enthusiasm to both you and your children is to work with them where their interests already lie. You can accomplish that by paying attention to their sparks. So what is a spark? Well, it's simply anything that your child says or does that indicates that this is something they're interested in right now. When you're paying attention to what your children are interested in, there's really no need to convince them to join in or to learn. It makes moving forward more fun and a lot less effort and work on your part. And frankly, at this time of year, less work and less effort is really welcome. So I want to tell you a story about Jack and the elephants. Every Friday, I would go to Jack's house with my traveling Spark Station, which was a plastic bucket filled with books and activities on certain subjects. And one day, as I came through the gate, I said, "Jack, what do you think's in the traveling Spark Station today?" And he said, "Elephants." And I said, "No, Jack, today we're going to learn about patterns. Woohoo!" And we had a wonderful day learning about patterns. The next week when I got to Jack's house, I said, "Jack, what do you think is in this traveling Spark Station today?" And he said, "Elephants." And I said, "No, today we're going to learn about germs. Woohoo!" Well, we did have a wonderful time learning about germs, even though they weren't elephants. But what do you think I learned? I finally figured out that Jack was interested in elephants right now. That's what he wanted to learn about. So the next Friday when I got there, I said, "Jack, guess what's in the Spark Station today?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Elephants." And he said, "Oh, good." I had really missed the mark. This is an example of a spark, and sparks have a shelf life. And the younger the child, the shorter the shelf life on a spark. Now, we had a great time learning about elephants, but what if on the second week when I said, "Jack, guess what's in the Spark Station?" and he said, "Elephants," I'd been able to say, "Yes!" Can't you just see the happy dance? It would have been a whole different experience. And frankly, you miss sparks every day. Your kids are telling you constantly what they want to know about. So today I'm going to share some stories with you to illustrate what I'm talking about, because it's the very best way for you to get a feeling and a vision for what sparks are and how you can use them with your children. First, I want to talk to you about Hannah's burping boys. Oh my gosh, I love this story. So let me begin by reading a letter from Hannah. "Hi, Marianne. I just picked up 5 books at the library last night. One of the books that I picked up is about the human body and burps. Yes, 2 boys in my family. And I was following a spark. Their obsession with bodily functions is hilarious, and they are wondering why these things happen. What fun! Funny is more like it. Love, Hannah." Hannah told me later that After she had shown her boys that first book, she went to the library and checked out every interesting book with pictures that she could find on urine, blood, gas, snot, all of it. And she said that for a whole month, her boys just pored over those books. They were so interested. They talked about all this stuff. They wanted to know everything. They drew bodies and tracked the bodily functions in the bodies that they drew. How does a burp go from the top of you to the bottom of you? They were so into it, and this was science at its best. Now, these are pretty little boys, and they're probably not going to remember the terms, but what they will never forget is how their body works. When our kids are burping at the table, what most of us would do is say, "Stop that. That's rude." Right? Sure we would, because we don't see what we don't see. But once you can start to see, you're going to say, "Oh my gosh, this is such an amazing opportunity." And that's what you're looking for, isn't it? An opportunity to have more joy with your children, for them to really love learning. Let me tell you about Leah's mud hole. Leah is a dear friend of mine and a past student, and if anyone ever learned the lessons about sparks, Leah did. She is a master, and I have shared so many of her stories over the years. Let me begin again by reading a letter from Leah. It began with simply digging around the boulders in my front yard. We went on vacation, and I didn't have time to plant, so I left the area dug up for a few weeks. Well, when you have a house full of boys, leaving dirt unaccompanied is like a blinking neon sign to them. These boys quickly discovered the joy of this little area, and they lovingly named it the water game. They used hoses to create waterfalls and floods at first, learning concepts of water pressure, erosion, and such. It seemed harmless, other than a little bit of mud on their bums. This quickly transformed into a 4+ hour a day adventure. They would beg to go to the water game every afternoon. Every day was a new creation. Every time we learned something new during school, it would quickly transform and become reenacted somehow in the water game. Army men began to make camp there. Asteroids were making impact craters. There was infrastructure being built, including a monetary system, lashing of boats, houses built, and of course demolished by whatever natural disaster we had read about that week. There were temples built. There were wars between God's army and Satan's army. Finding and playing with all manner of wildlife. Gladiator-type arenas built for huge male wolf spider fights. The whole transformed into wet season and dry season. It became the Kennecott copper mine. They brought out paint and did volcanoes and hieroglyphics. They tried to dig to the inner core of the earth. There were so many amazingly fun learning opportunities that I can't begin to even remember them, let alone to list them all. Neighbors would comment with delight after watching these boys go to work every day, even though my neighbors could have complained at the sheer disaster my yard turned into. The boys were a real inspiration to a lot of people and other kids. Now I have a hole so deep that they can stand in it to their chests. The crater in my yard will only last a few months, whereas the memories and the sheer exploration that came from it will last forever. Many of the sparks are still going strong that started from a simple muddy area and a hose. This is love of learning at its best. Love, Leah. Now, I'm going to make a confession here. I'm a fairly structured and orderly person, and when I was raising the bulk of my children, I would never have allowed this to happen, because I couldn't see what I couldn't see. But Leah, seeing what I wouldn't have seen all those years ago, used this mud hole in her yard that was so fascinating to her boys to teach them about Egypt, about the world, about the solar system, about right and wrong. She understood that the thing that is the most bothersome to adults is usually the thing that is most intriguing to children. And let me say here that whatever bugs you about your child is the spark. Whatever is annoying you or is creating a mess is the spark. And whatever you're afraid you might end up getting involved in, it is the spark. Now, Rachel was one of my very first parents that I worked with, and she was very tentative about homeschooling. And so, talking with her about sparks and utilizing what already interested her children paid huge dividends. One day, she took her children on a walk, and they found a letter on the sidewalk that should have been delivered but had been dropped. And it was to a neighbor that they had never met, and so they delivered the letter. And the man was so glad to get his mail that he invited them in. And they found out that he had lived in Africa for many, many years. And they spent the afternoon looking at all of his mementos and hearing all about the country that he lived in. And the children were absolutely enthralled and fascinated by this whole experience. And so Rachel did what any good homeschooling mom would do. She went home and asked this question: how can I expand this opportunity? So in her Spark Station, she added books and activities about animals of the African plain, animals of the African jungle, barter and what money looks like when it isn't money, life in Africa then and now, the country that their neighbor lived in. They found out more about that. They learned about Egypt, and at a garage sale, not shortly after that, they bought a book on Pompeii for $1. And then they, of course, talked about mummies and volcanoes and pyramids. They learned how diverse Africa is. They got a map and they looked at all of the countries and got books with lots of pictures and compared countries like Egypt and the Congo, which are totally different. And they talked about all these things, and it became their dinner conversation. It became their in the car conversation. It was the conversation that they were having, and it lasted quite a few weeks. It went on and on and on. Despite the fact that this spark did not come from a child per se, her children were so enthralled by the topic that it became their spark, and she took great advantage of that. Let me share you a story about a little boy named Miles who is 8 years old, and I again will introduce it by reading a letter from the mom. I should have seen this particular spark coming for a while with my oldest son, Miles, age 8. He loves rocks. He loves gemstones. He loves crystals. Rather than being a nag all the time and telling him to pick up his rock collection, I realized that this is what you were talking about. It is a spark. I can't believe I didn't realize it before, but these sparks really can turn into big burning flames, and that is what I want for my kids, right? Now, I want to share with you how big this flame actually got. It spanned an entire year, and it involved the entire family, including Dad. It began when Leah came home from an event that I had taught about sparks, and as she walked into the living room, she stepped on a rock, and she said, "Miles!" And then this was her response. And that's when it hit me. Our washer was full of rocks, our dryer was full of rocks, there were rocks on the kitchen table, and now I was walking on rocks in my living room. Very annoying. This must be a spark. Remember, I said, if it's annoying to you, if it's creating a mess, and if you don't want to be involved, it's probably a spark. Here are some of the things that came from this one spark. The first thing they did was create a management system for Miles Rocks. They created a collection and they did it together. Leah said, I gave him time and I let him tell me about every single rock. And that was a lot of rocks. Leah commented that this was really a bonding experience for them and that Miles felt heard. They went to the Clark Planetarium. They studied moon rocks and meteorites. They talked about the solar system. They went to a drive-in movie one night and saw a shooting star, and Leah said that was the end of the movie for them. They spent the rest of the time at the movie discussing the solar system and on the drive home. They got up in the middle of the night, the whole family, to watch a meteor shower because they had Googled things that kids could do to learn about the solar system and the world, and that was one of the things they found. They watched a lot of videos about the Earth by Bill Nye, the Science Guy. They took a nature hike to collect and view as many cool rocks as possible, which led to patterns and shapes and even statistics. And they were able to bring all of these things that they were learning together and direct them back to God, which really mattered to Leah and her husband. They actually took a trip to a dig to look for dinosaur bones as well as gems and other things. That was a wonderful vacation that they had. They discovered that their neighbor had been a geologist for the LDS Church, and this illustrates a principle of the universe. When you take a step forward in a good direction, the universe will come to you with what you need. It's a law. It is a principle. Until you take a step in the direction you need to go, you cannot expect a return. But the minute you will take a step out into the dark, Heavenly Father will open the windows of heaven, and what you need will come to you. This is a promise from Heavenly Father, and what Leah needed was a way to connect with Miles and stop being angry about something that was really annoying her, and that was rocks everywhere around their whole house. Well, they met with the geologist, and he showed them his collection and told them what it took to become a geologist, what kind of knowledge you needed to have, and what kind of work you could do, how you could serve in the world. And isn't this a dream that you mothers and fathers have? Isn't this the kind of learning experience that you want your children to have? And especially at the end of a long school year. And it can happen if you can just see and hear your children's sparks. Here's the end of Leah's letter. Miles isn't a very animated kid, so sometimes it's hard to know if we are even on the right track with him. But all of this was reaffirmed last night at dinner. We each go around the table and say one thing we're grateful for. The big clincher was when Miles said he was grateful to have a neighbor who is a geologist who he can learn from. We are on the right path, and it was all because of a spark. So here's the question. What can you do to increase your ability to see and hear your children's sparks? Well, ask yourself some questions. What activity do you have to make them stop doing to get them to eat or to go to sleep? What activity are they doing when they seem most engaged and alive? When they get to choose what to do on a free afternoon, what activity do they choose? What did they really love to do when they were 3 or 5? What do they talk about all the time? What are they currently doing that bugs you? What are they doing that's making a mess? What do they collect? Now, if you can't answer these questions, I don't want you to feel bad. I did not ask these questions of myself either when I was raising my children. But here's what does matter. That you begin asking these questions now, that you change the way you see your children so that you can answer these questions. Another thing you can do is to have conversations. Now, you have to make sure that these conversations do not turn into what children would consider a lecture. And I'm going to give you one rule that if you obey it, you will never lecture your children when what you really want to do is have a conversation. And the rule is make a comment and then be quiet. If your child doesn't respond or say anything back, then you're done. The conversation is over. That's the rule. So here are some tips for having real conversations with your children. And real conversations can start out about things that don't have anything to do with sparks. But the longer that you engage with a child, the more opportunity you create for them to say something, and you will see them light up. And you can say, oh my gosh, this is something they're interested in. So share your sparks with your children, and then they may share theirs with you. It might sound something like this. When I was a boy, I loved bugs. Oh, Dad, that's so gross. I know, my mom thought it was gross too, but she let me keep them in my closet. You kept bugs in your closet? Yep, I had 24 jars. Do you want to know what was in them? Yeah. That's a conversation. If you say, when I was a kid, I really liked to collect bugs, and nobody says anything, you're done. Pick a different topic and try again later. You might say, you're really good at this, and then be quiet. and listen. You might say, "This seems to make you happy or excited." What you're trying to do is get information from inside of them and not give them information from inside of you. You could say, "Have you ever thought of," and then add something interesting like what it would be like to go canoeing or about becoming a scientist. You might say, "I had a really great day today because," and then say something interesting such as, "I saw a flower poking out of the snow today." At dinner, ask, "What was the best part of your day?" and have each one share. Don't give them suggestions. If they don't have anything to share, they don't have anything to share. Let it go, Mom. Not everyone has to participate every time. The goal here is to get a conversation going among your children and yourself, and for you to listen to what is coming up. And the operative word here is listen. Another thing that you can do in order to see sparks more readily with your children is to be a role model. Be in touch with your own sparks. If you have nothing that sparks you or brings joy to your life, then, and I'm not saying this facetiously, you need to get a life. I raised 7 children, and time was tight, but I had sparks, and my kids knew what they were. And if you are not finding time to nurture your own joys, then you're doing a disservice to your children, because if you're not interested in anything, why should they be interested in anything? Make even small amounts of time to explore and develop your own sparks. What if it was only one time a month? If that's all you can give it, then give it that. Talk to your children about what you're learning and how much you like it. Even if you think it's something they would not be interested in, like if you're learning to do computer programming. At dinner, you just might say, "You know what I learned today? Can you believe that? This stuff is so hard." And then be still. Because one of your kids might say, "Well, you know what we're learning in school, blah, 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 and it is so hard." And now you can make a comment about that. "Gosh, that does sound hard. It was hard for me when I was your age." And now you have a conversation going. But I'm going to give you the number one key to help you see and hear your children's sparks. This is so dear to my heart because it is so impactful, and that is to be present. Now, I'm not going to give you a definition of presence. I'm going to tell you a story, and you will clearly understand what I'm talking about. So I have a daughter named Marie, and at the time she was 3 years old. And I was involved in a big sewing project which had a time limit, and I was feeling really pressed and stressed because I am not a seamstress and I don't even really like to sew. And Marie kept coming in like every 5 minutes. "I need a drink. I'm hungry. Barry's being mean. Jody won't share. I can't find this. I can't find that." And finally, I had it. And I thought to myself, if she comes in here one more time, I'm going to smack her. And that was my intention. I was going to smack her because she was being naughty, right? She knew that I was busy. Well, sure enough, in a short while, in she came. Now remember that my intention was to smack her. And as she walked through the door, I had a thought. Why don't you hug her instead? The thought was so startling to me because it was not my thought. Because remember, my intention was to smack her. It took me by such surprise that I came to a dead stop. My whole mind cleared. The agenda went out of my head, and that's the key. There was no agenda left but this little girl who had just walked through the door and I had been prompted to hug. So I turned to her and I picked her up and I held her close to me for about 30 seconds. I can still picture it perfectly. Can see her hair and smell her neck. And I said, "Marie, I love you." And then I put her down, and off she went. And she never came back. And I finished my project on time. Because what did Marie really need? She needed my presence. Now, some people say, well, she needed your attention. Please don't use that word. It has a negative connotation. They're being naughty. They need my attention. This is not that. This is something else. This is a gift that you give another person of your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole thoughts, even if it's only for 30 seconds. It's a gift you give to people in your life. It's a learned skill, and you can learn it. Now, on your handout, which I hope you printed off, there are some suggestions on how to practice and learn presence. So take advantage of those and begin practicing. It only takes 3 minutes a day for a consistent amount of time to learn to be present. Spend time together as a family, and sometimes just with one child. Then, when you're with them, be present. Giving time and presence are the most important thing you can do in your family. Presence, now, I want you to hear what I'm saying. It's a bold statement, but I know it's true, and I've seen the effects of it. Listen. Presence will do more to bring happiness and satisfaction to your life than just about anything else you can do in your home. Now let's recap what we've talked about for the last little while. If you see and hear your children's sparks and then follow them, it will make your end of year schooling easier, more fun, and learning will increase. Seeing and hearing sparks is a skill that you can learn, and I've given you the resources to help you learn. Ask questions. Engage in conversations with your children. Be a role model. But the number one key to seeing and hearing sparks is to learn to be present. Now, as we end, I have a gift for you. I want to give you an amazing learning packet which can give you something to work with while you're learning to listen to your children's sparks. It's called a Rock and Spark Station packet. It's on magnification. It's called Magnify It. In it, you'll find 20 pages of ideas, crafts, and activities, family events, all about how magnification works. And your children are going to love it, and you're going to love it, and it was going to give you a lot of ideas to use over the next couple of months. And in order to receive your free gift, I'm going to give you the URL, and you just go there, and it's going to ask you for your name and your email. And of course, when you put them in, you're going to get a page that'll say, confirm your subscription. You're not really subscribing to any product or anything. I just want you to know that the service I use, Aweber, I didn't know how to change that to your free gift. So don't let that stop you. And when you click on the confirmation in your email, the packet will be right there. It will come right to your inbox, and you can print it off. So here's the link. http:// tinyurl.com/LXPUPLZ. And if you didn't get that, it is on your handout. So everything you need is on your handout. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. Videoing is not my favorite thing. I love being in front of a live audience, but I hope you'll forgive any errors or me looking at my notes, and remember what I've shared with you, that your children are telling you every day what they love, what they're interested in, what they want to know about. And if you will learn to see them and to hear them, you will be well on your way to having some magnificent learning experiences with your children, whether it's the beginning of the school year or the end or in the summer. Have a wonderful time with your children, and thank you so much for being here.